Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Dobre večer. My name is Saeed Mohammed. I work at Qatar National Library in the Research and Learning Department. I'm very thrilled and very excited to see you all and participating in this wonderful event. QNL is delighted to partner with the Embassy of Bosnia and Herzegovina to organize this event. And QNL expresses its gratitude for their cooperation and full support in making this event possible. Thank you, Ambassador. On October 19th, 2003, Alija Izetbegovic departed from this world, and today, on his 17th death anniversary, we are hosting this event to pay tribute to his work and recognize his struggles. May Allah grant him the highest stations of Jannah. Alija Izetbegovic may be best known as a president who single-mindedly struggled for a just end to the conflict which ravaged his country in the 1990s. In the face of indifference of Europe, which had lapsed on his 50-year-old promise of never again as concentration camps once more sprang up in its midst, he tirelessly campaigned for justice at home and abroad. To some, he is difficult and uncompromising. To others, he is a man who sought to live his life by the highest of principles. As a prisoner of conscience in the 1980s, he once wrote, "When I lose the reason to live, I shall die." Born in 1925, he was educated in Sarajevo before qualifying as a lawyer. He was imprisoned twice by the communist government of Yugoslavia in 1948 and in 1983. On the second occasion, as a Muslim intellectual, he served 5 years or 14 years sentence merely for his written word. In 1990, as his political party came to power with the fall of communism, Alija Izebegovic was elected as president of Bosnia and Herzegovina. He stood by his people throughout the war of aggression against his country in the 1990s, leading his people with nerves of steel, living by his principle both as a European and as a Muslim. He signed the Dayton Peace Accords in November 1995 and was re-elected to a three-member collective presidency in 1996. It was his principles, however, for which he eventually resigned his position in 2000, announcing that the international community was taking things forward in a manner with which he could not live. Alija Izetbegovic is one of those rare individuals who have managed to both inspire and lead a whole nation in its pursuit of freedom, winning the admiration of people and the world over. His esteemed career as a lawyer, activist, politician, freedom fighter, and scholar is what we will discuss in today's panel discussion. So today we have three eminent guests, and two of them who knows Alija Izetbegovic very closely. And our first is our ambassador, His Excellency Haris Lukovac, a highly accomplished professional with a demonstrated history of working in governmental sector and international affairs, encompassing political affairs, civil affairs, human rights, law enforcement, cooperation, safety and security, and diplomatic relations. He has extensive knowledge and experience with international relations and cooperation in the areas of security, law and law enforcement and counterterrorism within the European and Middle Eastern affairs. He is skilled in political science, policy analysis, politics, and strategic planning in European and Middle Eastern affairs. And our next guest, His Excellency Faris Nanic, is a civil engineer, journalist, editor, and book author. In 1990, he joined President Izetbegovic in formation of the first Democratic Party in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Party of Democratic Action, SDA, that won the elections on the same year. During aggression and war of genocide against Bosnia and in the war aftermath, he served in various government positions, including head of his cabinet and assistant minister of defense. He published 4 books, 2 books of political and cultural essays, a travelogue, and a President Izetbegovic biography. He also edited 6 books, 3 authored by President Izetbegovic. Currently, he is a member of SDA Senate. He is one of the initiators of Alija Izebegovic Foundation and a member of the steering board. And the last and the final speaker today, as panelist today, is Professor Mohamed El-Moctar. He is a professor of political ethics at Hamad Bin Khalifa University in Qatar. He got his PhD in history of religion from Texas Tech University. His academic interests include philosophy of religion, religious reformation, and political philosophy. He has published very extensively. I can't read all of them, but some of his works are like, the best Muslim minds in the 20th century, the political discourse among the Prophet's companions, and some of his works in English, the Crusades' impact on Sunni-Shia relations, early American perceptions of Muslims, slaves of Allah, early African Muslims in America. Most of his work were translated and published in Turkish language. Some were translated into many other languages: French, Urdu, Persian, Bosnian, Kurdish, and Tamil. So today's format of the program will be mostly like an interaction between the panelists. So there will be questions that I'll be asking to all the panelists for 1 hour, and then after that we'll have public Q&A. Might I ask everyone to mute yourself if you don't have any conversation, if you're not talking, and so that we can hear our panelists clearly. Ambassador, I wanted to start with you. You've been very close with him. You spent a great deal of time with him as a president while he was a president. Could you please shed light on his character and personality? What is his nature as a person, not as a president or a political leader, as an individual person?
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Haris, as you told our members of our event, and I would like to emphasize it is very challenging task to describe in a few minutes the character and the personality of any great historical figure who embodied so many extraordinary qualities and roles. A great statesman, a leader, and a wise man like President Izetbegovic, for me personally, it's a very special and personal experience. As I was working closely with the President Izetbegovic in the most difficult moment in the history of our state and our people. At the time, our relationship was close but professional, as I was 4 years in charge of his security and safety. But it was also more like a father-son relationship. So it's impossible for me to distance myself from such a strong emotion in this moment. As a sincere fighter for the right of, I will emphasize what you said in the beginning of your opening this ceremony. He was a really strong fighter for the Muslims in that state of Yugoslavia. President paid high price of 40 years of imprisonment for his strong beliefs and his courage to oppose the state system. In that time, communist system was very strong. Everything what was they think against the system, it was prison. At the first glance, he radiated a spiritual, immeasurable power, and that was felt at the first meeting by everyone. I was witness of the many meetings which he had with the foreigners, and for the first time when they come out from the office, what is comment from them. He was always warm and cordial with the people, a refined sense for how to act in which situation. He was sincere and very honest man who always looked for a way to help people, even those he did not call known as a personal. He was very caring for his family. He especially expressed towards the children. That was something that he told me in my problems in my life. Care about children. They are the force and the power behind you. They will keep you to be straight. That's something what I always following. I think that his children were a special inspiration for him, and thinking about them then gave him a special strength during the difficult times on his life. For example, what I can give you in this moment, after the shelling of Sarajevo, we have often left this office in the presidency building to work around the city and the sea damage caused by the shellings. They strongly believe that it was also the way to provide moral and psychological support to the citizen. It is very difficult to understand who didn't pass something like that when you are surrounded and shelling from the hills in a town. During those walks, he did not hesitate for a moment to stop and talk or to passers-by who would like to stop him and start a conversation about the situation on the battlefield, in the political field or battlefield. After that, he always analyzed and exchange opinion of view those people he meet on the street and with us in the cabinet, and also with the people whom he invites to get real and good advice for the solve some problems in exact moment during the war. He respected the opinion of every interlocutor. He was good man and a leader in very bad time and the situation, and great man. That's most simply to say like that. I tried in the short time to express what I feel. For me, it's really difficult to not be emotional about my president. He is still my president.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We totally understand your emotional connection. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this event.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Mr. Faris, I'd like to ask particularly about his political career, about his life before and after becoming a president, and his life as an activist, as a freedom fighter. So I want to ask you, begin with, like, what were the main issues that motivated him to become politically active? Could you share his early political journey and his thought process?
Well, assalamu alaikum to everybody. I would, I may be also a little bit emotional, maybe not as much as His Excellency the Ambassador. I also did have a very strong relationship with him, not only during the war, but some years before, after he was released from prison, and of course after the war until 2001. And it's not very simple to talk without emotions, especially on the occasion of the 17th anniversary of his demise. Just to a small digression, it is also on the 8th of August. It was the 95th anniversary of his birth, also, which gives this may give this meeting also another perspective. Why I mention this? Because to answer your question, what was the main issues that motivated him to become politically active? First, his upbringing in a Muslim family, his early encounter with Quranic and Hadith principles that regulate the art of good governing and the work for general welfare. Second, he really did have a genuine interest in philosophy, especially European and dominantly German classical idealism, that until his high school graduation in 1943 shaped his vigor to become socially, not necessarily politically active at that time. Third, and very important, I think, is that his early comprehension of then growing gap between Muslim peoples and nations, very few nations at that time, in 1940s, and Western nations, but also some Far Eastern nations like Japan. He early realized that the main problem was, and to a certain extent is even today, it's the ignorance, lack of good education, especially with women, futile conservatism, and complete omission of large layers of Muslim population in Bosnia and abroad in the world to take inspiration for their lives in ayat al-Quran or in hadith, coupled with invalid ulama at that time that turned to recitation instead of contemporary studies of Quran and other Islamic sources. This was the state of affairs in 1940s, don't forget. Of course, he was aware, and he personally knew some outstanding members of Bosnian ulama, especially reformers like Mehmet Hanjic and Jamaluddin Čaušević, and he respected their work and ideas. But he was right that a great part of ulama then was inert, not modern, educated, and therefore not equipped to teach and lead. As per Islamic thinkers, except the classics from Ghazali to Ibn Khaldun, he was focused to the work of contemporary reformers such as Muhammad Abduhu, Jamaluddin Afghani, Amir Shakib Aslan, and Muhammad Iqbal. This did not mean he followed their political engagement, but only their ideas and concepts. In conclusion, his early and later works were based upon notions of freedom with responsibility and Islam as reconciliation between this world and eschatology, spiritual and material, private and public, and active life in doing good in the name of Allah, to which a prerequisite was acceptance of His will. This is, in shortly, what I think, how I lived his work and his ideas. Of course, his early political journey began when in 1940 he joined the Young Muslims Movement, organization actually, a group of Bosniak Muslim university students who shared his thoughts on Islamic world crisis, its roots and ways to deal with it, especially in education. During the Second World War, Bosnia was occupied by Croatia and included into a pro-Nazi artificial so-called independent state of Croatia, where the government insisted that the organization to become a part of the strictly controlled umbrella youth organization, which they refused and rather accepted the code of Islamic community, but which then turned them politically almost inactive. On the other side, they were largely engaged in helping refugees and victims of genocide in 1940s in eastern and western Bosnia, committed mainly by the Serb chauvinists in early stage in cooperation with anti-fascist communist-led partisans. The latter eventually became a part of Allied forces and won the war, but also power to rule. Since they were close to Bolsheviks and Stalin at that time until 1948, the position of the young Muslim organization that renewed its activities after the war, upon victory over fascism, was not envying. They were staunchly anti-fascist, but also very anti-communist. And the new regime has already eliminated one of their teachers, Mustafa Busluć. Nonetheless, they decided to take part in formation of Muslim Cultural Society called the Renaissance, Preporod, and some of their members were even elected to its leadership. And Izetbegovic had his first public political appearance. That was in 1945, the autumn of 1945. And he really represented himself as an eloquent, even though very young, as an eloquent and brave orator standing for his democratic principles of rights of citizens and freedom of speech, press and association. This opened his file with the secret police immediately. That was active until demise of socialist one-party system in Yugoslavia and Bosnia in 1990. So for 45 years, he had his file opened with the Secret Service. He was strictly followed for everything he was doing. His social and political activism in the young Muslim organization that soon had to go even underground because the regime has tightened ideological control, finally led him before the military court in March 1946, where he was convicted of crimes against state and regime and sentenced to 3 years in prison. He was a law student then and serving his military tenure. His associates from the movement who were prosecuted under heavier charges in years to follow received much harsher sentences from death to long-term prisons. This killed the movement efficiently, and they killed the movement efficiently, and the remaining members after release completed their university studies and kept individual contacts and private contacts, which turned out to be crucial for Izetbegovic studies, research, and work activism in 1960s and 1970s.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. Faris. The next question I wanted to just follow up on the imprisonment that you talked about. What led him to get imprisoned, and how did the trial go for him? And particularly when I was reading his autobiography, there were a lot of challenges he faced, and his family and his close associates faced as well as a result of his political activism. So could you define, what was his period during the time of imprisonment? Because he had during the young Turks, young Muslims, when he was he was imprisoned, and then in 1980s he was imprisoned again when he finished writing the book Islamic Declaration as well. So could you talk about his time in the prison, what led him, and after he came out from the prison, what was his personality like, and what was his motive and his resolve?
Well, first of all, let's go back to what got him imprisoned in 1983. That was his activity. That were his activities in the second half of 1960s and through the 1970s, as I already mentioned. So after completing law studies, he worked in several Sarajevo-based construction companies as legal advisor. But simultaneously, he continued his research and studies of philosophy, Islam, and politics, especially philosophy of law. He was never rehabilitated as political prisoner in the period of 1946-49, but slowly as Yugoslavia opened to Muslim states through the non-aligned movement, its government really loosened its tight position towards Islamic community and Muslim thinkers generally. He began to write in annual edition of Islamic Community called Takwin on the problems of Islamic Renaissance, and in 1969 wrote Islamic Declaration that was not widely circulated at the time, but was stored by the already mentioned political police for future accusations. He also became an unofficial mentor for new conscious generations of Bosnian Muslims in pretty much changed politically loose circumstances. This had not passed unnoticed by the regime. Loosening was accompanied by intention of Tito-led central government to counter Serbian and Croatian nationalism, rising at that time, by strengthening Bosnia and its position in the Federation of Yugoslavia, and of course, consequently, Bosniaks as its largest people, and of course, a major political force. Since this was inseparable from the Bosniak Islamic identity, the whole scope of various activities in the Communist Party itself, and without the Communist Party, was launched, and eventually the communists became afraid they might lose their decisive role in the political life. Beginning of the 80s, after death of Tito as the leader, and attempts to re-centralize Yugoslavia coming from Serbia, in the growing economic crisis of the 1980s, led Bosnian communist rulers to settle accounts with what they called Muslim nationalism and Islamic fundamentalist tendencies. They were fighting an enemy that really had never existed, for the purpose of demonstration of force and durability of the already dying system. Alija Izebegovic and his associates and proteges were logical victims, so to speak. In March 1983, 13 of them were arrested on baseless and later refuted accusations, subject to Stalinist interrogation for 5 months without even presence of legal advisors, and finally, at a staged political process, sentenced to long-term prison sentences. He was sentenced to 14 years at district court in Sarajevo. His sentence was reduced in 2 consequent appellation procedures for 9 years in 1985. The main crime he was charged with, this is very interesting, were the text on Islamic Renaissance and Islamic Declaration as a book, even though it has never been widely circulated in Yugoslavia or even in Bosnia. But since, Allah governs history, as Izetbegovic believed, the staged process that was meant to destroy him actually promoted him into the future leader. These are these historical paradoxes. His defense was impeccable. He refuted every line of charges against him, but never denied, in the same time, he never denied his authorship of Islamic Declaration, even though it was criminalized. When he was finally released from serving the rest of sentence in November 1988, he became the most known anti-communist dissident in Bosnia and recognized by Bosnian people as their future leader in democratic transition that was about to happen. In 1989, he began to organize first genuine democratic party in Bosnia, which was as you mentioned, the Party of Democratic Action, that in 1991 majority of votes, and he took responsibility together with his party for leading the country first to a democratic multi-party system transition, then the independence, international recognition, and subsequent struggle against attacks from Serbia and later Croatia. The prison time he used to uplift himself. Not only that he was not destroyed in prison, but he uplifted himself. What came out of his prison time, of his 5.5 years in prison, were a fantastic book, which is called My Flight to Freedom, which is my personal favorite. I edited 3 of his books. I wrote his biography, and this is my personal favorite book, because he wrote it in, Jawaharlal Nehru wrote a number of letters to his daughter Indira, the future prime minister, during his time in prison under British rule. She collected these writings in 1966, and it was amazing for me when I wrote that book, amazing how the imprisonment actually uplifts your spirit. The same thing happened to Alija Izetbegovic, but there is a great difference. Alija Izetbegovic was sentenced by the communist regime, and he had much harsher conditions in the prison than Jawaharlal Nehru under British rule in India. So it was amazing how he was writing his thoughts, and these are philosophical thoughts. These are thoughts that tackle economy, that tackle politics, that tackle physics, that tackle a lot of things in a hidden way. And he was smuggling these very small notices, very small papers with notices. He smuggled it through a fellow prisoner who was a criminal, who was charged for criminal offenses, out of the prison for future collection and publishing. That was, so he actually, when he came out of prison, he was not he was not shattered. He was not weak. He was stronger. That's why he was able, just a couple of months after after releasing from prison, when he he took a couple of months to get some rest, to reunite with his family. Don't forget that 3 of his granddaughters were born until he was in prison. So he immediately said, "Okay, I have an idea," and he started. He began to talk to people, and I've been lucky to be one of them. I was very young at that time. I was 25, 26 years old, but he noticed what I was writing at that time, and he approached me. Can you imagine? He, as a political dissident, a writer, a philosopher of law, approaching me, a young journalist who was writing something in a bit more democratic circumstances in Croatia at that time, and called not to ask me about some specifics of Muslims in Croatia, but to tell me, listen, will you join me in an adventure of forming the first democratic party? This was Alija Izebegovic after the war, after the prison.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that I didn't know that he was inspired by Jawaharlal Nehru, and also he wrote fantastic work, The Discovery of India, in his early prison years, which become the one of important books of Indian philosophical thought actually. I just after he became president, he got majority. I mean, particularly for people outside Bosnia, I mean, before he was a political dissident, not many people are aware, but he became very prominent to the outside world, especially in the Muslim world, through his book. But when Bosnia was under siege, the Sarajevo was under siege, and so many people noticed him and his resolve to fight against it. So could you talk about what are the challenges that he faced during this Bosnian war, and how we managed to mediate this ethnic tensions, that was just running high between Croats with Serbs, all of them, and how did he envision building the post-war Bosnia? What was his idea about it?
Well, there have been many challenges. I may single out 3, perhaps. What you refer to as Bosnian War was actually a war of aggression and genocide against the state of Bosnia and its Bosniak Muslim people. So the first 2 challenges were actually how to save and preserve Bosnia as a territorially integrated and sovereign state, which was the only framework in which the Bosniak people may survive. The second was to repel the onslaught on Bosniaks and stop the genocide, the ongoing genocide, which actually took 4 years in various parts of the country. This he accomplished by first organizing his party, the rule of law as leading partner in the government, economy under severe conditions of partial occupation and rebellion, organizing emerging Bosnian army, which was very, very important, and the philosophy of organizing the army and connection the army with the people needs a special addition. It's a very important part of his work in forming the Bosnian army and connecting the army with ideas with the people itself. And of course, strengthening the army's fighting capacities under condition of, we must not forget that internationally imposed embargo. So this was really, the challenges were tremendous. It's actually, he fought the war with his, it was at a certain point, it was a dual aggression, and he fought the war with a lot of sympathies from the outside, but with his hands tightened. He couldn't do, there was a very little maneuver space, politically, militarily, and even diplomatic. So finally, by presenting the Bosnian case in all its aspects to the world, which he did tremendously good with the help of his first associates. But when I say all aspects, I mean identical, historical, multicultural, Muslim and Christian, and democratic. This is what Bosnia really was, is, and we hope it is going to be in the future. The third challenge was maybe hardly noticed even by Bosnian friends during the war. The democratic aspect he managed to preserve and cultivate under harsh wartime conditions. I think he must have been the only leader in modern history who did not resort to censorship under war conditions. Of course, except military and state secrets crucial to fight the war. This I see as a direct result of his life experience. With limited freedom, heavy price of 9 years of imprisonment. He never gave up democratic principles. He included legitimate representatives of other Bosnian peoples, Serbs and Croats, but also national minorities, into the government. He never wanted to defend and build Bosnia by excluding any part of its sensitive societal fabric. He was not able to resolve ethnic tensions, that were fueled from the outside, but his inclusivity and dedication to strict division of power helped him to lead the country in its worst challenges in history, having support not only from his own Bosniak people, but also from other citizens. The building of post-war Bosnia was based upon his call after signing the Dayton Peace Agreement to make small steps with the vision of building a better community, which will be based upon humane and democratic principles by which it can be proved to those who fought against Bosnia that this was the only way to preserve peace and secure just development. Even though he followed and monitored the whole process of Dayton, of implementation of the Dayton Peace Agreement until he finally resigned, it is, to my opinion, it is regrettable that he did not take a larger role in conceptualizing economic policies, where he, as a philosopher of law, could have prevented deviations in privatization processes or degradation of industry. He had the authority. He had the moral authority. Maybe he should have been more involved. I even had a chance to tell him this in 2001, I think, when we met in his office in the party. But he was modest. He said, yes, but I was not the expert for economy. I'm a lawyer. I said, yes, but you are a moral leader. And my opinion was that he could have, because he did have a strength, he did have the authority, he could have influenced the wrong processes in privatization process and downgrade of Bosnian economy.
Interestingly, I see a remarkable resemblance of life between Nelson Mandela and Alija Izebegovic. He served in so many years in prison, and then he came out and he became a leader of the party, and then became a president of South Africa, and then and he stepped down, and similarly, and he couldn't. Still, there are ethnic tensions run high, between the whites and blacks in South Africa, and I see a lot of similarities between Nelson Mandela, as I hear from you. So I wonder, it's important that you mentioned about some of the economic challenges that the Bosnian face. So what led him to step down from the presidency in 2000, and which he mentioned that if there is no principles that the state is not going in the principles that I envisioned, so I'm just going to step down. And what was his life after the presidency? And I have one final question on his influence and legacy, but I will just ask before the end of the conversation. So I just want to address these two particular sub-questions from you.
Well, first of all, we have to be aware that he stepped down very much due to his severe health problems that he was dragging since release from prison. 4 years earlier, he suffered a heart attack that was added to his prison legacy of asthma and lung problems. Once he said, maybe in 92, 93, he told me that this was going to kill him. This problems that he had with lungs and asthma, that this was going to kill him. He used to be a smoker before in prison. He even smoked in prison, but then he stopped. Sometimes he would ask me, do you have a cigarette? And then I would give him a cigarette. That would be one a day or something like this, but that was very, very rare. Finally, after the heart attack, he completely quit smoking. He continued to preside over his party for another year, and he was dedicated then to writing his memoirs. Shortly before stepping down, he published his book, My Flight to Freedom, as I mentioned before. That were his prison writings. These prison writings really revealed how educated and interested in the world phenomena he really was. even though Islam between East and West is his groundwork, and this is going to be discussed by other people, but my personal favorite are his prison writings, as I already said. He remained the only real political and moral authority with Bosniaks, and that was crowned by prominent international awards for his achievements, including the highest award by the state of Qatar, to which he was very proud of. Well, I would say his influence is doomed to be growing in the country as we are approaching really an unprecedented crisis, economic and political, both, in a apparently changing world, with or without Corona crisis. The Corona crisis will pass, but something else will come. Corona crisis was just a trigger for an already ready, prepared economic crisis before April or February this year. Bosnia is already and will be hardly hit by these turbulent changes, again, endangered by more or less explicit neighboring claims to parts of its territory. That has to be, we have to really take good care of this, because this was not we have certain experiences, not only from the last war, but from periods before.
Thank you, Erickson.
And work, just one final sentence. His thought and work and his whole legacy that is now being taken care of by public institution, Alija Izebegovic Museum and Alija Izebegovic Foundation, is a well of inspiration for public and political actions in deterring these dangers, but also in finding solutions to the growing number of problems in governance, securing justice, rule of law, and preservation and cultivation of identity, no matter how complicated and multi-layered our identity is. He is considered a true leader and a father of a nation by majority of Bosniaks still, and a leader without whom Bosnia would have never survived. As every person who does good throughout his life, he had friends and enemies, the latter much less. And it is a universal destiny of people of his fabric and convictions, bravery and decisiveness. This has been recognized by the largest Muslim publication in UK, Muslim News, and in 2001 established annual award for good citizenship named after Alija Izetbegovic, and that has already very prominent laureates, and its dedication presents a highly representative event in London with prime ministers, government, and local ministers and mayors attending or even awarding the nominees. So his work has been recognized even in the UK. Of course, by the Muslim community, but by very prominent Muslims in the UK who even named one of the awards after him. That's why I said his legacy, his work, and his books and his articles that he wrote are doomed to be very significant in the future, especially for us, for the Bosniaks in Bosnia.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. Faris. Now I turn on to his intellectual, like his philosophical perspective, like his thought. Besides as a political statesman, like, he was a philosopher too. Professor Mohamed, could you please share his thoughts, particularly like Alija Izetbegovic published many books, and two of them remain very popular besides his biography, Islamic Declaration, Islam between East and West. Could you talk about his philosophy and what kind of thinker he was and what's his influence? You need to unmute. No.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Saeed, for this extraordinary opportunity. And I'm really honored to be with this great intellectual and politicians, and with you, with people who know Ali Izzet firsthand. So this gives me much more understanding of what I know about him theoretically, because I'm dealing with him just as a researcher or academician. I didn't meet him, and I haven't unfortunately visited Bosnia, which is a wish that I hope inshallah will be one day. Well, if you allow me, I want to start with some just personal touch. I was very young student in the 90s when the war in Bosnia was going on, and I was touched deeply by following the news of the war, like any other Muslim and human beings who cares around the world. And as a young poet, I was writing poetry actually about Bosnia. I still remember one of my poems called My Apologies, Sarajevo. And it was, Ya Sarajevo I'tidaran, it's in Arabic. And I sent it as a young man. I don't know why I sent it, but I sent it to a magazine in London, an Arabic magazine that was published in London. They were surprised a few months later, one of my friends bringing to me an issue of that magazine with the poem in the editorial. So I was following, just like anybody else, the situation in Bosnia. And then when I started studying philosophy of religion and the history of religion at Texas Tech University, then I discovered Alija Izetbegovic as an extraordinary philosopher of religion. I started reading about him, not only his theoretical books, but also his autobiography and his extraordinary book that Faris talked about, my escape to freedom or my flight to freedom. I was able to find all of these books in Arabic translation or English translation. Then I started to understand his character as a human being, but not through personal interaction, but through his life and his ideas. I found him extraordinary, proud believer in Islam, and I think that deep and strong belief has a very important impact in his life and achievement. He's a man of principle. He's a humanistic philosopher, a very brave fighter, an encyclopedic scholar, a lover of freedom. When I read his book, My Flight to Freedom, I was struck by the extraordinary reading that probably he was doing in the prison. So you cannot miss any philosopher or any intellectual from the time of Plato until the 80s. And it was extraordinary encyclopedic. It showed to you the encyclopedic scholar that Ali Izzet was. His works, of course, I'm familiar with his work that has been translated into Arabic or English or French. So I got more interested, and then I published a short chapter on him in my book, The Great Muslim Mind of the 20th Century, which is talking about 7 thinkers that I really like, starting from Muhammad Iqbal, then Muhammad Abdullah Draz, Malik bin Nabi, Ismail Farouqi, Muhammad Hamidullah, and Ali Izetbegovic, and Muhammad Asad. These 7 personalities I wrote about their life and intellectual achievement. Very, very short book, actually addressed to young people. I just want Muslim youth to know about these great personalities and their thoughts. So to go back to your question after this long introduction, his book, Islam Between East and West, to me is one of the extraordinary intellectual masterpieces that has ever been written about religion and philosophy of religion and about Islamic thought. And when I was teaching a course on religion and religious experience at the College of Islamic Studies, Hamad Bin Khalifa University, for several years, every semester my students have, one by one, they have to summarize this book, because I know it's going to be extraordinary addition to their intellectual training and understanding of the meaning of life and the meaning of religion. Islam Between East and West, to me, presents Islam. Ali Izzet did not deal with Islam in this book as a religion. Actually, he described Islam as a third way that is not purely religion. Purely religion is Christianity, for example, and there are some materialistic ideologies or even materialistic religions, but Islam is a comprehensive way of life and a comprehensive understanding of life. And that's why one of the interesting points I found in the book is when he said that it's very hard for Christians to understand the personality of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he said in Islam the perfect man continues to be a man, continues to be a human being. But in other religions and philosophy, a perfect man has to get out of its humanity. But Islam is a very practical. So we can, my personal understanding, and of course, it's very embarrassing to talk about Alija in front of people who know him much better and know his thought much better. But my understanding that his philosophy can be translated into a principle of practical ethicality or ethical pragmatism. So he's very ethical, but he's very practical. And this is how he understands Islam. It's not about monasticism and running away from our responsibility or getting absorbed with materialistic life, but to be both spiritual and material, to be both ethical and pragmatic. I think that's how he understood Islam, and I think that's really the essence of Islam. Islamic Manifesto is a very simple book. I think he wrote it for the youth, and probably I think, I don't know, I believe my brothers here can correct me. It was very provocative for the communist government because of the title more than because of the content. I mean, the content is just very typical book, simplified book about Islam to the modern reader. But when you have the Islamic Manifesto or any communist leader who's very serious about the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels, so that's very provocative politically, and probably that's one of the reasons they targeted him. It is also translated to Arabic. My Escape to Freedom, it's Faris said it's his favorite. It is also my favorite because it's extraordinary encyclopedic. It has extraordinary deep contemplations and reflections that really show how Ali Izzet was very deep thinker at the same time as an encyclopedic scholar. I kept till today some of the quotation from the book, my Flight to Freedom, because I love just those quotes. So I have the book in Arabic, not in English, but I like to read some of them. One of them said, "Prison represents a piece of knowledge that is very painful." And he said that the human beings suffer in prison from a lack of space and surplus of time. So he's suffering from lack of space. At the same, also he's suffering from surplus of time because he's just kept there in that cell for 24 hours a day. And I was struck with his extraordinary humanistic character with all of the suffering on personal life and suffering of his community at the same time. In this book, he wrote, "I do not carry hatred. Rather, it is just bitterness. I do not remember that I ever despised anyone." So with all of the suffering, he clearly doesn't have any hatred against anyone, even the worst of his enemy. He doesn't have any hatred. Also, he's a clearly very brave man, and he reflected that in his own personal and political life, but also he wrote about it. One of the quotations I have from his Flight to Freedom is, he said, the nation does not think, or the nations do not think in honor of intelligence. Rather, they think in honor of bravery, because bravery is more scarce. There are less brave people than intelligent and smart people. So that's why human beings really like bravery more than intelligence. And he finally believed in the power of ideas. And he believed that one of the weaknesses of authoritarian regime is that they cannot control people's thoughts and ideas. One of his reflections in the book is he said, I could not speak in a prison, but I could think. And I decided to take advantage of this ability. So I'm taking advantage of the ability that he cannot control. He cannot control my thoughts. Well, let me say very quickly the impact of Ali Izzet in the Arab culture and the Arabic-speaking world today is very important. His books are translated. He's an extraordinarily respected intellectual. There are some specific intellectuals who really work hard on him. One of them is the Egyptian Abdul Wahab al-Misiri, the author of the Encyclopedia of Zionism and Judaism. He loved Ali Izzet, and he said that also he read Islam between East and West every 6 months. So it's like when I was teaching, every semester I have to ask my students to summarize it. So this is one of the intellectuals who did a very good job to make the Arabic-speaking world know about Ali Izzet. There is an Egyptian journalist from Al Jazeera who was in Al Jazeera, As'ad Taha, who was Al Jazeera correspondent in Bosnia during the war. And also he did very good job on, last of his work on Ali Izzet is a documentary that was broadcasted by Al Jazeera, I think 1 or 2 years ago. There is an Egyptian translator, Dr. Ades, who translated his memoirs into Arabic and wrote a book about him. There is a Sudanese who was a very close friend of him, and they have who studied in Yugoslavia. Unfortunately, I forgot his name. I had his book on Ali Izzet in Arabic, but I lost the book 2 years ago. And he exposed some of the aspect of his personal life that we don't know much about it in the Arabic-speaking countries, with many nice, rare pictures, etc. And he talked about his early days when he was a student in Belgrade and how he met Ali Izzet and the organization of the Muslim youth, and how Ali Izzet surprised me how Ali Izzet translated one of the books of Sayyid Qutb into Bosnian in the 70s, which is his book Had ad-Din. But he didn't put his name on it. That was very dangerous politically at the time. He uses like a pen name, that book. These Sudanese diplomat and intellectual also wrote about him. There is a Qatari intellectual, Mohamed El-Ahmari, Dr. El-Ahmari, who's the head of the Forum of Arab and International Relations in Qatar. He published a book a long time ago about Ali Izzet, especially his views on aesthetics. So there are many people, and I think he's now well known in the Arabic-speaking countries. But it's general knowledge more than deep analysis of his philosophy. I think really we still need to have some academic conferences and some academic works about his philosophy specifically. People now know about his political life and his personal life. All of this is available now through books translated into Arabic, but I think there is not much work about his philosophy of religion, philosophy of history, that is can be found in his book, especially in his masterpiece, Islam Between East and West. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mohammed. It's wonderful to hear that, like, it's still like his work has been appreciated and liked by in many people like in Islamic and Arab world. So I just like to ask His Excellency, the Ambassador, particularly like, you have so much to add, a lot of interesting things. Before I just wanted to ask, like, if you have any questions, please list your questions here. If you want to ask any of the panelists about his life, about his work or anything, please list your questions. In the meantime, Your Excellency, could you talk about his legacy and what are the other things that you want to add, like as a final wrap-up thoughts from your side?
You are asking me?
Yeah. Yes, Your Excellency. Yes.
I don't have too much to add in this moment. I could give more picturing things during my time and our connections during the war. There is many anecdotes, and then every free moment we use to make some fun that we release him from this serious issue, what he has in his head during this intellectual fight for the Bosnia with the foreigners and with our situation and our neighbors in Sarajevo. The most important thing is that he never lost in a mind relation with the population, with the nation, with the ordinary people, especially in Sarajevo. As I mentioned in my beginning, every time after shellings, we waited hours and hours in some shelters that shelling stopping in Sarajevo, and then immediately after that he wanted to get out from that and meet the people and see what's happened with these grenades and the places in those days. And in that way he stopped with many people and exchange of mind and the idea how to stop that, how we can survive such a situation. And he used that in his political life and political position in negotiations, that he expressed what is going on. It is not just Muslim world in Sarajevo. It was mixed with the Serbs, with the Croats, with the other nation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that shall not get just Muslims, which was intention from the hills in that moment. It's a very specific moment, and then to tell you, I liked many times to spread this story with my children and the youth, to express what we passed and how he was strong to keep that position, even when we was in a situation that we saw that tomorrow we will not be alive. But he finds power and force to stand up and continue that fight on that way. Thanks to him, we have, yes, as Mr. Faris told us, it's a very difficult situation, politically, diplomatically, anyway. But it's also is a global position. Especially for us, it's very difficult because we don't have too much friends right on the left side of our countries. In a war, because of the suspension of diplomatic in our intention, we are losing momentum in this moment. How we will, I cannot tell survive, we will survive already this situation, but how we will go forward, I think that we have to give more efforts and follow all his idea, what we have to do to reach what is the best for the country in this, and for our nation. I cannot avoid the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have, as a majority of Muslims, 2,600,000 Muslims in Bosnia, then the rest to 3,800,000 is Serbs and Croats. But in a moment they understand that they are all Bosnians. We will go forward. That means that we have to in some way stop influence from the eastern side and western side of our neighbors' position, and then continue our way to grow up and to stabilize our state and make again normal life in that state. I believe that my compatriots understand and accept and agree with me as well as.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We have like a few questions. I understand Mr. Faris wants to leave, but this question is to you. What has been done to preserve Alija's legacy so far? We know that there are many attempts to discredit that legacy as well. And then the second question to Professor Mohamed is, in what ways his religious and philosophical standpoint shaped his leadership? If someone in the panel could tell us with example, any of us could do that. Starting with Mr. Faris. You need to unmute. Sorry, you need to unmute. In the meantime, like when we figure out, so I just want to ask like about his the second question. In what ways his religious and philosophical standpoint shaped his leadership? Your Excellency, do you want to share, and Professor Mohammed, like either of you can jump in to share the point here.
If you don't mind, I will start with something that is very, very remarkable for the President Izetbegovic at that moment, especially the war. I'm mentioning permanently war because I was in that time with him. He never get any decision that he didn't consultate, especially religious people from any side, is that Orthodox, Catholic, Jew, Muslim, and then after them he will call journalists, book writer, smart people, philosopher, and then if I could analyze all idea, how could solve any problem, especially in that war, political or war problems. Even that he is not warrior, if I could say. He showed that he is a thinker who can solve even military problems in that moment. I believe that Professor Mohammed can give us more about that, such things. Philosophy and President Izetbegovic, how he survived that situation.
Professor Mohammed, you want to add something, or?
I think to understand how Islam shaped his view of the world and how Islam was extraordinary inspiration and a source of strength for him, we need to look at his early days of life. So he talked about that he used to go to pray Fajr. There is a mosque, and he loved Surah Al-Rahman. The Imam used to read Surah Al-Rahman in Fajr prayer and with beautiful voice, and he was deeply impressed by the reading of Quran in Fajr time, especially Surah Al-Rahman. For example, you find these kind of small stories that he's talking about in his early days that really, I think, shaped his personality. The fact that his grandfather, for example, was an officer in the Ottoman army also, I think that has something to do with the Islamic legacy and pride of Islamic history and identity. So I'm sure that Haris and Faris know much better about these kind of details, but I look at this early impact as very important in shaping his personalities and worldview.
Mr. Faris, you want to talk about his attempt to discredit that legacy? This will be the last question. I know you have to go, so we'll just try to stop one.
Earlier, there are two institutions that have been established in order to preserve, collect his works, preserve his legacy, and to promote his ideas and his concepts for the future. One is the Museum Alija Izebegovic, that is a state institution, the budgetary institution, and the other is the Foundation Alija Izetbegovic, with their very specified missions and visions to use his thoughts, to not only collect and preserve, but use his thought for the presentation of the Bosnia coexistence, of the Bosnian historical perspective, the Bosnian historical experience, and also to use this collective work and his ideas for the future political decisions, many political decisions that would shape the position of Bosnia in the years to come, and very challenging years to come. This is what his works are not only being collected, they are being also catalogized, and we are trying to form a focal point for studying his works here in the city of Sarajevo. And inshallah, we will manage. So I'm not afraid of preserving his books, but I'm more afraid that we lack at this point, we still lack capacity or will to learn from him, to learn from his works, and to use his wisdom for shaping our policies in the future. That's what we need to do. That's what we still lack, and that's what I think is our main task here. In of course, not only in the museum and the foundation, but also within the wider layers of society.
Okay. We have a comment from the QNL Research Department Director Abir. Please, yeah.
Yes, thank you everyone. It's interesting and inspiring, to be honest, discussion about this great person and all the accomplishment that he has done. I have a message here from His Excellency Dr. Hamad Abdulaziz Al-Kuwari, the ministers, the States Minister and the QNL President. I have invited him to attend, but unfortunately his time didn't allow this. So he wants me on his behalf to convey his gratitude and appreciation for all the panelists here, Mr. Faris, Mr. Haris, and Dr. Mohammed. And he's expressing, his inspiration with this great president, this great person, Mr. Ali, and he wanted to prepare a speech for this. Sorry, I'm hearing my echo. Sorry for that. So he wanted to prepare a speech to share his inspirations from this great person, but he was not able to do that. So on his behalf, thank you everyone, and he's appreciating all your contribution, and hopefully he will be with us in future events, inshallah. So thank you everyone.
Thank you, Abir. Just one final question we have. This is a political question to Your Excellency and Mr. Faris. Do you think that the Dayton Agreement was the best option for Bosniaks? Will be. I promise this is the last question.
Was it the best option? It was not the best option. It was the only viable option.
Only one.
The only option, unfortunately. So President Izetbegovic was faced with a very harsh choice. In 1995, the Americans stepped out and told him, if you do not accept this, every other process will be finished. So there will be no further peace processes, no further peace initiatives. So if this is your last chance. But the whole Dayton Peace Agreement was signed by President Izetbegovic, not because he was thrilled with it, but because as a philosopher of law, he understood the Anglo-Saxonic way of thinking and legal thinking, that the framework agreement and all these annexes actually had this embedded in the embedded amendment procedure. So the Dayton Peace Agreement is not just has not been conceptualized by the Americans as something firm, done, and forever. It was conceptualized as an evolving process of re-establishing the functional state of Bosnia. So this is why President Izetbegovic, as a philosopher of law, first of all, that's why he signed it. Not because it was the best or the optimal solution, but it was the only solution that had this opportunity to secure peace and stability, and to be amended in the years to come for the benefit of stability and durability of the country.
Okay.
I was 3 days in Dayton at that moment. And then one day, President told me, look, you have to go to Sarajevo and be ready to draw maps with the experts for the maps and send us here how we arrange all situation for about Dayton. The negotiation, as Dr. Faris tells us, it's almost 1 month. And just President Izetbegovic was under pressure to accept everything that they proposed. Proposal came from the United States. They worry because of elections in a couple of months, and that was something as a success for the American administration that they did it during the Clinton time. And that was something that we have to accept. On hand, the Dayton Agreement was signed. I was in Sarajevo on aerodrome when the president came and asked, how is the situation? He told us, that's good to stop blood. We have to work, continue work to be better issue. But for 10 years, other side, opposite side, which was fight against us, will keep that as I think we said, as a gold. Will not give, as we have now situation. Everything that you are moving in forward to make state as a normal state, they are, no, this is not Dayton Agreement. What was true, what he said. And now, one very wisdom sentence, what he told me, look, this is something as we have the problem with the teeth. You go to the dentist and he get out the teeth and you don't have pain anymore, but you cannot eat properly. What is the situation now? The state is not state that we could jump and run and forward in economy, in politics, in diplomacy, in other all aspects of life. But we have to use his wisdom to continue fight. As he said, be sabr, as we said in our language. Use the sabr, patient, but with activities, not just lay down and wait that somebody other doing things. We have to do that. As Mr. Faris tells us, we have to explore such things and prepare young people to do and fight for that idea.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, Haris Lukovac, Faris Nanic, and Professor Mohamed, thank you. That's all what we have for today. Thanks a lot for your contribution, and QNL expresses gratitude for all the for everyone who participated today. And QNL has several books on Alija Izebegovic, and also we're going to add some more DVDs that the embassy has provided. Thank you, Ambassador. And thank you all, and have a very good night. And may he remember him, and may we pray for his peace. For his highest stations in Jannah. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.